right, I'd like to call a special meeting of the Budget Review Committee to order. It's October 4th, 2020 at 8:40 p.m. at the Aldermatic Chamber. Let's start by having a roll call. Clerk?
Alderman at Large Laurie Wilshire.
I'm here.
Alderman John Sullivan.
Here.
Alderwoman at Large Shoshana Kelly.
I'm here.
Alderman Ernest Jetty.
Here.
Alderman June Karen.
I'm here.
Alderman at Large Michael O'Brien is present. And our clerk, Alderman Richard Dowd.
Clerk.
Excuse me, our chairman. And we have also in attendance Alderman Clay and all, that's it, yeah.
Okay. And the other people, John
Yes,
Griffin,
we
Sherman.
also have in attendance John Griffin, CFO, Treasurer, and Tax Collector, Cheryl Linda, Treasurer, and Management Officer.
Chief of Police.
We also have Attorney Stephen Bolton, and His Honor the Mayor is also attendant, and the Chief of Police, Chief O'Rourke. We have Fire Chief, Chief Buxton. We have CFO Dan Donovan of the School Department. And we have Matt Sullivan of Community Development. Tim Cummings from his new title. Exactly. We'll let the clerk work that out. And from Park Rec, your name, sir?
Brian Conant.
Okay, from Park Rec, present. Did I skip anybody? Please raise your hand. There was a group of you. All right.
All right, first item on the agenda is public comment. I would please ask that anything that was stated in public comment in the public hearing, which was a couple of minutes ago, not be repeated, but is there anybody that wants to add additional public comment on the agenda item of R-22063?
Lori Ortolano, 41 Berkeley Street. I'm not certain how, if I'm looking at this correctly, the $4 million of surplus that's used to take the tax rate down. On top of that, we have the $7.5 million that's being spent, and of course, some of it's apportioned and saved to meet our obligation under our legislation to maintain 10% in a balance. I think the shift here, the money that's being allocated for the tax rate reduction is simply too small. 7.5 going to projects and $4 million to reduce the tax rate is just the wrong way. Perhaps it should have been, $9 million to reduce the tax rate and a small amount left to do some of these projects. Because I think there's a real need to do that here and now. And I don't know if we've ever done a tax rate reduction on that magnitude, but these are extraordinary times where we're seeing quite a shift, and largely produced by the fact or the result of not having done a measure and list in many years, having depreciation not calculated correctly within the properties, having commercial properties not rise at the same rate as residential, and having a high inflationary rate. There's a lot of factors here that led to this, as well as a lot of spending. I'm also a proponent of not worrying about the AAA bonds from the two companies. I think we're weighing that too heavily, and nobody's been able to provide specific data on what happens when you go to a AA bond that the other municipalities have. And I, for one, think that if your bond rating came down an A, that maybe that would keep you from spending so much money bonding if you had to pay a little more for it. Because we bond like the Dickens. There's $35 million of bonds on the next October 13th public hearings for us to vote on, and those are all higher level bonds. So, I'd like to get specific information without having to write to know on what happens when the bond rate changes to AA. I know that in the meetings that wasn't answered by leadership, and I think it's worth having answers on that. Thank you.
Anyone else that wishes to speak in public comment? Seeing no one, we'll move on. Communications.
There are none.
Unfinished business,
There is none.
new business resolutions.
Before us this evening is R-22-063, relative to the reappropriation of fiscal year 2023 escrows. Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion to recommend final passage.
The motion on the floor is to recommend to the full board final passage of R 22-063. Any questions, discussions by Alderman? Alderman Sullivan?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to clarify before I ask my big question of the evening, but just to reaffirm the math that we had, I believe it was stated that about $2.5 million put towards tax collection saves about 1% against the tax rate, which would be about 18 cents. Could I please get a confirmation on that?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. My big question is, I would like to see $2.5 million come out of this escrow fund and put towards the tax rate to help lower the tax burden for Nashua citizens. And I would like to, before we get into it, what the appetite of this committee is to do that.
I'm going to defer to Mr. Griffin in a minute, but over the past 12 years that I've been on the board, it's always a question of put more money towards the tax fund, towards the taxes. The problem is if we put more money towards the taxes this year that we don't have excess next year, it almost doubles the tax rate the following year. And trust me, we don't want to double the tax rate ever. Mr. Griffin, can you expound on that a little more about if we overindulge spending escrows to reduce the tax rate, how that can get us in trouble the following year?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. John Griffin, CFO, Treasurer, Tax Collector. This is what I would refer to as a balancing act of what we're trying to do. There's no question with the difference of growth in the values of our group of residential. There's almost no solution that's smart or other than trying to cut the rate 1%. You're right, 2.5, as the mayor said, reduction is a 1% off the tax rate. If we do use 2.5 million of what I refer to as one-time dollars, you're kind of embedding a structural deficit in your budget. And I'm not sure, it's going to be a number, obviously. The rate is going to be something 18 cents lower. But I struggle with using one-time revenue to basically take what has been 4 million for several years and make it 6.5 in this particular year. These evaluations, not the measure and list, but revaluations, they happen every 5 years or sooner if the ratios get out of whack. I don't want to digress too much, but Portsmouth a few years ago had back-to-back-to-back revaluations because the ratios were getting way out of whack. So that's the mayor and I and the team, we studied this issue hard, and we think that this proposal, and the reason why the mayor went over everything again is the way to go at this point.
Yeah?
Yes.
So to clarify on that, what you're telling me is that if we took another 18 cents off the tax rate by moving $2.5 million in there, that we run the risk of, and I want to make sure I get this right, doubling the tax rate?
No, what happens is if as was stated before, we ask our divisions to be very frugal as they spend their monies through the year. And they do, as the school department has. And then they have money left that they give back to the city, where we have that as escrows. If, you know, we put all the money towards the tax rate and gave them nothing for saving it the next year, they're more apt, especially the school department has autonomy on it, they're more apt to spend it all. And the other departments will try to get a lot closer to their budget number. And then we have no additional revenues to put towards the tax rate. And the tax rate could go much higher because we don't have anything to offset it. We're putting $4 million this year to offset it. So as you said, it's a balancing act. It's very tricky, and you have to be careful because to solve a short-term problem, you don't want to create a long-term issue. I don't know if that's going to answer your question, but I've heard it explained numbers of times by numbers of people that know a lot more about the tax rate and math than I do. So.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
just one
Mr.
point of
Griffin.
clarification. It's not going to double the tax rate. Tax rate, as the mayor indicated, 1830. It's not going to double to 36. It's the increase that you're looking at the following year. If you take 2.5 million and reduce the tax rate, you have to replace that the following year just to break even. It's not doubling the tax rate, it's doubling the rate of increase.
Unless
Oh, yes.
we
So-
modify the budget next year to account for it.
You can always do that, that's true.
Alderman Jettie?
Yeah, thank you. So on this larger question, I hear what the people said during the public hearing, and I think we've all received emails from people. This idea that if it's true, somebody said that the average, tax increase, the per household, the average is going to be, $900. And so when we went through this reevaluation process, I was telling people, don't worry, the reevaluation, the value on your house may go up, probably will go up, but it's going to go up on, for everybody. And so the money that the value that we base the taxes on is going to go up for the whole city. So, the value of the houses are going to go up, and that means that, it'll be split among, more, a higher value. So the tax rate's going to go down. So, the end result is, your taxes are going to stay pretty much the same. But, I don't know, do you know, is it true that they're going to go up? The average is going to go up $900? And if that's true, why is that? Did the budget go up? Is the budget that we passed for the next fiscal year high, that much higher than it was the previous year? Can you answer that?
Mr. Griffin?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm not going to be answering it as an assessing person. I'm going to answer it as the practicality of a situation where we had rapidly increasing sales. And we had a disproportionate amount of sales at the lower levels of the inventory.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what.
I'm sorry, make sure you can hear. I'm not sure how the 910 was calculated. I haven't seen those numbers. No one's average, and I've tried to tell you that during the whole budget process. Average is meaningless to me as a taxpayer in Tingsboro. Absolutely meaningless. I want to know what my value is and what the tax rate is. And I want to know what it's going to be so I can figure it out. I was in the gas business for 20 years, and we said we can't do any averages because no one's average. Says if you use between X and Y therms, you might have a bill increase between 10 and 30. So this here, averages, I find very, they're good calculations, but you're gonna have just as many people unhappy as you're gonna have maybe happy. But the 910, I'm not sure how it was gotten. I'm sure there was a numerator and a denominator. When I watched the assessment meeting, the Board of Assessors meeting the other day, they haven't finalized everything yet. Still waiting for the results of the informal hearings, as well as another big piece of the evaluation, another big piece of the assessment is the utilities. So you're gonna add that all in, but we're definitely gonna get to a point where we take the budget of the city and we're gonna divide by the net assessment of the city and get a rate. Mayor indicated about 1830. Now we're talking about like the margins. We're talking about taking 2.5 million. And I'm not sure what the average is gonna be. I don't know if it's gonna go from 910 to 900. I don't know. But I know there's several thousand individual assessments that have been done that are gonna affect each and every person individually. So I'm not sure if I've answered the question, but from.
Can I add to that? Do you
Sure,
mind?
Mayor?
So, to Alderman Jetti's question, I mean, the problem is, in terms of the revaluation, that the homes have gone up so much, on average 40%. And the commercial properties have not gone up nearly that much. Right now, we're in litigation with Pheasant Lane that says their assessment, their value went down. So the commercial properties did not, and Pheasant Lane is the biggest property taxpayer in Nashua. So the commercial properties did not go up as much. Now, this is a state mandated procedure, supervised by the state of New Hampshire, and in the end, the assessing firm has to report to the state of New Hampshire and get the details of the revaluation approved by the state DRA in something, I believe it's called the USPAP. But the reason, and so according to those regulations, the tax burden is assigned according to fair market value. So if one property owner held 10% of the value of the entire city, that top taxpayer would pay 10% of the taxes. Or if a single, and this is just hypotheticals, if a single taxpayer owned 1% of the entire fair market value of the city, they would pay 1% of the taxes. So right now, pre-revaluation, the homes pay about, and this is based upon their share, they're about 65% of the entire tax base. So they pay about 65% of the entire tax burden, which we're saying we'll collect on the budget about $250 million this year. But because post-revaluation, homes have gone up 40%, commercial hasn't gone up nearly as much. The proportion of the total tax base represented by all of the homes will go up from 65 to something higher. I don't know the exact figure, 69, 68, 70, something like that. So now the home, and that's based upon the fair market value that we're required to use. Because again, homes went up 40%, commercial property didn't, so let's say it didn't go up at all, or it went up very little. So it's become a smaller portion of the entire tax base. So when that happens, it shifts the property tax burden from the commercial, to some degree, from commercial to residential. And that is the unfortunate effect of the revaluation. I guess it means that people have a lot more equity, but as many have pointed out, great, it's good for your kids, but for you right now, if you're struggling on a fixed income, it doesn't do much for you. Okay, you've got $300,000, $400,000 of equity in your house.
I guess you could get like a reverse mortgage or something, but most people aren't gonna do that. So, I mean, you can't spend it, so it doesn't do you any good. But that is why the reval, now, the example you gave at the beginning, if the commercial property had gone up as much as the residential, yes, you're right, it wouldn't affect people's taxes. But because the homes have gone up so much, and there was recently a report of the 25 most expensive metropolitan areas in the United States for housing. Guess who's on the list? The top 25. Manchester, Nashua, metropolitan area. Like, I never could have imagined that would ever happen, 10 years ago. But now, I mean, we're not San Francisco, we're not New York, but we're still in, near the bottom of the top 25, but still in the top 25. Housing, because of the demand, has become very expensive here. And that has driven values up and has affected the taxes in the way I've described.
Alderman Jettie?
Thank you. And so the other question I asked is, the budget that we passed for fiscal year '23, is that, people are saying we're spending too much money. Did that go up substantially over the previous year?
Mr. Griffin?
If we didn't have a reval, the budget went up a little slightly less than 4% as an increase.
The budget we passed was about 4%
23
higher
was,
than the
right,
previous year.
correct.
But
And the
what
rate
I'd
of-
like to emphasize is that we're trying to save money in various ways. I mean, and you've approved all these things, and thank you for doing it. We instituted a new health plan, that's saving $3.9 million a year. Now, it doesn't mean the health care costs went down, it just means they stabilized to some degree. The electricity contracts we've got that I mentioned to you the other day, mentioned to the board the last time we met, saving the city millions of dollars in electric costs right now as opposed to the 22 cents. You remember we cut positions out of City Hall. One year we cut City Hall's budget by 3%, not including the cost of pensions, which the state raised. In the meantime, the state's raising our costs. So, we should do everything we can to save money, and I think we've done, and we have done things to save money, but it certainly doesn't save us from the effects of the revaluation.
Alderman Jettie?
I mean, if we cut 10 million out of the budget, yeah, the tax 10, 15, 20 million, but, look for 10 or 20 million out of the tax, where are you gonna get that? Close a school, close a few fire stations, lay off 100 police and firefighters, where would you get that kind of money?
Alderman
So,
Jettie?
yeah, my comment was going to be if the budget, to the people who think we're spending too much money, if the budget went up 4%, think of what the rate of inflation is, what the salaries for all of our employees went up, about that same amount. The amount of money that we have control over is not that great. People in my ward are asking me, for example, this is a small item, but somebody said, hey, our sidewalks are, we have sidewalks, but they're, we have to walk in the street because there are bushes, trees, encumbering the sidewalk. And I called the Board of Public Works and said, can you go take care of those trees? And they said, no, I'm sorry, Alderman Jettie, we don't have the money for that. We don't have that in our budget. So, there's a lot of money, a lot more money we could be spending on very necessary things, that we haven't. And so, I understand the the expression of people, saying that, they're afraid that their taxes are going to be too high. And I'm afraid of that for you too. And, I just don't know, what we can do to ameliorate that situation, without making it worse, in the future. So.
Mr.
I
Chair?
have more questions, but I just wanted to get that general thought out. Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes?
I mean, people can estimate what their taxes are going to be by using the approximate figure of $18.30 per thousand and multiplying it by the number of thousands in their assessment. And again, if it were up to the city, this would not be the best time to do a revaluation. And if people have mentioned that if housing prices go down, what are we going to do? Well, I would say we go for not this full measure and list, but if housing prices went down and commercial did not, we could go for another revaluation more quickly to try to readjust the relative burden between commercial and housing. But we have to see if that happens. Might not.
Thank you.
Alderman Kling?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to add to something that my colleague to the left had mentioned. Up in Concord, I always fought to get more money sent down to the municipalities. And I wanted to see it go down there. And when we finally were able to get some to go there, I thought, oh, good, we can reduce the tax burden on it. I was quite excited about it and so on, until I was taught that when we do that, what we do is we do hurt them in the long run, because we take this money away from them, that kind of like giving them a rebate, and the next year say, no, we're putting your tax rate right back to where it is. And no one's used to ready for that. And as I think someone mentioned about the escrows don't understand it too, so that becomes all estimated, and it becomes quite confusing and so on. One of the things that we did a couple years ago, maybe even was last year, if I remember correctly, we did some major cuts in City Hall. I think the mayor mentioned the 3% City Hall cut, and I know that some departments, such as Director Cummings' department, lost a position, and many of them did that. So they had to do the same job with less people, and they kind of hobble along for a year, but we can't sustain that. We can't keep making cuts to these departments and say, you still have to continue doing that. I'm not going to get into any other things, but there's also other burdens that have been put on them in addition to their regular jobs. So the more cuts we make, they're unsustainable, and we have to just kind of go with the flow. I agree. I would love to give the $2.5 million. 18 cents is 18 cents. Every penny counts. I know that the home that I live in, it's going to be about $1,000 or more a year for that particular property. I know my utility bills went up, almost tripled in 1 month. I understand the burden. I think we all understand the burden, and we're not trying to hurt any of the taxpayers, but to do something right now that would be in a large amount, in the end, we're gonna hurt them the following year, because I don't see the economy changing much. And then what are we gonna do? And yes, it would be nice to be able to say, well, we'll just cut, the $2.5 million next year from the budget. But the problem is inflation goes up. And the more we try to cut from the budget, again, we're just hobbling ourselves, and it's unsustainable. And to the comment to my colleague on my right here, someone once told me that if all waters rise equally, so do the boats float. I know I missaid that, but if everything went up the same, we would not see any changes. But the problem is, and I think one of the speakers had mentioned that, the smaller homes increased significantly. Larger homes maybe not so much, but the businesses actually kind of went down in value. And I think that's kind of the point, is that to the mayor's point, that we go from 65% of the homes being the tax burden up to 69, 68, 70, even if it's only 66%. we're seeing that it's shifting more and more. Maybe things will change, maybe the housing market will change. They said it's slowing down with the interest rates going up, but I don't see it slowing down around here. So we may just be a little slower on that. And then when that happens, we can do another evaluation, much what Portsmouth did. I think they did 3 or 4 years in a row. They did that. And maybe by doing that, we'll see a change in the businesses going up and the housing market kind of staying about the same. I think if we give the $2.5 million towards the additional $2.5 million towards the tax rate and not fund some of these items, and I don't think of these items as being fluff. I looked at every single one of them with quite an interest. And to a comment that my colleague from Ward 7 had mentioned about the Greeley-Jackman Trust Fund, I think when we saw the proposed budget, there was 73 in there. And I know that's been decreased because of monies that they put for the stage and so on. So I think it's a lot less than what we had expected. But I agree with you. We should look at that fund when we need to look at things for Greeley. We shouldn't just forget that it's there, which I think has happened in the past. But I do think that we have to look for every other option, and that's why we have a grant writer, and that's why we have our energy manager and so on. I think the city's going in the right direction. To the comment of the police wanting the 2 extra positions, I have to admit, coming in here, I knew that they had lost positions, but if we don't allow them to have these positions, it doesn't mean they're necessarily going to spend them. They're just requesting that we put the money towards there. If they don't spend that, that's going to come back to escrow the next year and so on. But if they did get up to complement, as they had done in that for those 2 weeks, it gives them the ability to do everything that they have. And maybe the point that was made that we should work together. Can the police and fire handle all this growth? Yeah, maybe that's a nice idea, but I don't think practically it can work that way. I think we have to take opportunities, and we can't tell some business you can't build a house, you can't build a housing complex because we don't have enough police or fire. It's not the city that's necessarily building those things. So we have to keep that in mind. We can't tell outside contractors you can't grow because we don't have police and fire. We have to grow with them and not the other way around. Thank you very much.
Okay. By the way, the police department has 13 openings, but they got 7 people in a pipeline coming in to fill those. And Chief Rourke took the position of putting a person in charge of recruiting, and that's, correct me if I'm wrong, Chief, but that's working out pretty well. And they will be able to get up to full speed. So I think I had Shoshana first and then you.
Thank you. So my question is around the SURF. I think that obviously having money in there is really important. We're always at a deficit. But my question is, if we don't put it in there, oftentimes we've just used it as emergencies have come up. So what's the effect of actually putting it in there or just using it if a fire truck breaks?
It's hard to hear you. You would have better bring your mic closer.
Is that better? Do you want me to repeat my question?
Mr. Gervin heard it.
Okay. Sorry. I was sitting back.
I did heard it. I heard the comment. Just briefly, when SURF was first, what I would say, reconfigured back in 2010, when there was a study on vehicles, the objective was to put the amount necessary to not only pay for what you were buying in a particular year, but adding to it. And as the years went on, spending cap was really a noose around our necks in several regards. But when you have 1% inflation, 1.5% inflation, you can't spend much. So, see if I can be a little clearer. The money that we're putting in and recommending to put in this year allows us to go in fiscal '24 with the general fund, the bonding, and the grants, and give you folks the confidence that when you're approving that one page, we have the money to pay for the vehicles. all right? And we put 3 million in last year, put 3 million in this year. We have a balance, but as I mentioned, some balances at a point in time is only because they haven't purchased the cruisers, they haven't purchased the dump trucks, they haven't purchased things. So we're getting by with it. It probably needs a one-time, $20 million injection, which we don't have, so you have to. And as I said, the team that meets on the SERV vehicles, they work together and they really look and see, is there enough mileage on the patrol pursuit vehicles to buy another one, or can we save a little bit of there? How is the dump trucks, how are they doing? You've heard from Mr. Conan what happens when you don't replace something since 1986. It's really not going to work effectively. So don't look at it that we're, what would happen is I'd have to tell you at the beginning of next year's budget season that you don't have enough money for the stuff that you're approving. So are you going to put it in the budget? Or are we going to wait for next year and then use escrows next year? So we kind of have a good system now that we're actually able to afford most of the things that are necessary and are targeted for replacement. Every single vehicle is described and has a date that it needs to be replaced. It's different than the amortization of the life of the vehicle, and then you fund it. Like if you had a vehicle that was gonna last 10 years for 100,000, you'd put 10 grand in a year. They redid it. We make sure we have 100,000, we have to replace it, so. It's an important step. As the mayor said, we've tried that before. When I first got here, the Packers picking up the trash and things were just in deplorable condition. They look like the vehicles that you see that aren't owned by the city, right? Dump trucks, the bodies falling out of the back. I mean, fire trucks are in great shape, but some of those ancillary vehicles, and you need to replace those things because you're paying for the staff to do, you have to have a combination of the infrastructure, vehicles with the staff to use them. Hopefully I answered the question, I'm not sure.
You did, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, I had Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to state, if I may, that I am going to support this. I know to some out there, it's going to be woefully short of what they're going to anticipate, but it's something. And it's better than nothing. Because we have a municipality to run, like it or not. But we got a city to run. And you got to remember the long history of 25 years of a spending cap. What do you think? Nothing went wrong in 25 years? Look at our current infrastructure. We discussed briefly the stone house at Greeley Park. Was it lightning last week that made that roof in bad repair? The answer is no. It was many years. Or perhaps maybe it was somewhat salvageable, some minor repair work. It was never done. Right now, as your chairman of infrastructure, I'm looking at other facilities that need some tender loving care. It's going to take some investments. I'll use again, 1 Court Street. Again, no hurricane blew that 1 Court Street over.
14.
Huh? 14 Court Street, thank you. I was a little short of the address, but 14 Court Street. I mean, how many years of neglect? And now it's going to take an awful lot of money to repair that. I myself had the opportunity to serve as captain of Crown Hill Fire Station, the old one, on Arlington Street. Every single time it rained out, water would come down the walls. I would not let my dog live like that, but 4 firemen per shift did. And I'll tell you, I had Dole 1As in my locker, and if you don't know what those were little steam valves that you needed to replace the steam to keep the heat running in the place. You know, and it was shameful. And those were during the years of the spending cap. So again, I apologize. I would like to make everybody happy, but I keep in mind that the city as a whole has its needs. We all come up, we want a better park for our kids. Well, it costs a little bit of money. Everybody comes up with their favorite project. Now, I've seen somebody email their pet projects. I don't think any of them are. It establishes ourselves to the quality of the city that we like to live and work in. I like to have the lights work on the bridge. I think it does look nice. And particularly if they're gonna be green on St. Patrick's Day, I'm all about that. But the thing is, how can we have that? And that's not really a big luxury. So try to amend it, trying to make it fair to everybody else. I support this. Is it everything that the taxpayer might want, try to help them out? No. And I want the taxpayers to understand, I'm like them too. As far as I know, the fact that you're all sitting here in this chamber, you're city residents too, and you pay your fair due of taxes. Nobody gets any special benefits for sitting in this horseshoe. You know, so what affects the people out there affects us all. So again, I think this is trying to balance many quality of life issues. And maybe may not get it 100% right, but I think we do try, and I'm going to support this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anyone else? Alderman Sullivan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, a question. If we were to amend this resolution, sorry, is it a resolution or an ordinance?
Resolution.
Resolution. Would we do it similar to what we did back as we were going through the workshop, the budget workshop, line item by line item? Or is it simply an off-the-top amendment?
Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I think if you wanted to reduce the escrows and apply it towards the tax rate, you would have to say which lines you were gonna get that amount of money from.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
And then it would be voted on.
right. Understood. Could I have a follow-up comment?
Alderman Sullivan?
Thank you. I am not going to support this as it is. We went through 6 weeks of a budget process where each and every city director, many of which were here tonight, came up and explained to us their department, what monies they needed to fund it and to keep the city running. At that time, I had put in some budget cuts that about $1 million that I would have liked to have seen come out of the general fund. Didn't pass. We have the budget. These funds that we're talking tonight are over and above what we approved. And from what I'm hearing is, in some cases, it sounds like we're trying to make up for years where we haven't funded it adequately, and we're trying to play catch up. To that, I would say, not great timing. Because I think when it comes to a budget that we've funded, to keep the city up and operating. That's with the teacher's contract approved, fire, police, school budget has their budget. That's all set. We passed it. It's now running. We're 1 quarter into it. This is over and above. And I would say at this point, it comes down to prioritization of where we want to put these dollars. I think at this point where we have this, we return it back to the people. I don't think it's a question of whether or not we're funding the city to an adequate level. We did that. We approved it. It's done. I don't think we should talk about that. This is over and above. And I think there's $2.5 million in here that we can find and give back to the Nashua taxpayer. Thank you.
Just one clarification.
Sure.
This is not an add to the 23 budget. This is 22 budget money.
I understand that.
Okay. Alderman Kelly had her hand up before.
Don't want to belabor this. I'm going to support this as well, but I did have one question. on the Court Street roof replacement, and I'm not sure who can answer this. The way I'm understanding it is that there's extra left over from doing that roof. And I'm just wondering why we're putting it into the City Buildings Trust instead of the trust we just set up for Court Street.
Yeah, Mr. Griffin?
I can take a shot, CFO Griffin. You're absolutely correct. The prior funding was for the roof. The roof has been completed, so whatever was left, in crafting the proposed resolution, we're trying to put, as the mayor indicated, trying to put funds in the city building trust fund. Not necessarily in the Court Street trust fund. It's going to City Buildings Trust Fund, which is there to assist when necessary, the myriad of city buildings we have.
I understand. We just talked at length about the Court Street Trust Fund, and I don't think there's any in there. So if it was originally allocated to them, would it make sense to at least leave some portion of it in there? Because, I mean, we spent time coming up with this trust fund. I don't believe there's anything in it, or there's very little in it, if you could remind me.
I think my recollection is we set the trust fund up to fund a small amount. I believe it was equal to the revenue that was generated. And then we also funded a strategic plan for the facility. So I think those are you're correct, it was a nominal amount. It wasn't anything close to what had been provided for suppression and roof replacement.
I believe that the monies that were put aside for the roof was a bond, and I think we did put, isn't it?
No.
I'm trying to find the information. There's so many.
It was cash.
Cash?
It wasn't borrowed.
But it wasn't part of the monies that we put into the trust fund for Court Street.
No, it wasn't.
I think
Well, I
that
think
was-
it was a previous escrow is where it came from.
Yeah. All said, Alderman McKellen?
That was my question. Not sure we've answered it, but I'll be set for now.
Alderman Cleen?
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. A couple of things here. First, I'd like to say that I really would like to make sure that you do fund the emergency management position. I had reached out to Justin for a number of things, from simply, someone who needs housing or shelter, or even different types of cooling areas and so on. And it was nice to have that one person, not having to go to this department for that or this, and try to chase our tail. But in the big picture, when COVID hit, I had a long conversation with Director Cates, and one of the things that, as good as we were with COVID, he had noted that we had some shortfalls, in that we had the building that had a lot of the PPE stuff and so on, but that it had expired. He was in the midst of creating a plan that would make sure that when this happened, it was nice to have a central position that could take everybody. You had the emergency meetings that went through, and it brought all the departments together, not each department stepping on each other and crisscrossing and so on. It was nice to have a coordinator that made sure that the city was safe and all of those things. I'm just bringing up COVID because it hit us as it did the entire country. And while I think we were prepared to some extent, no one was truly prepared for what we were going to be facing. And I think it was a lesson learned, and I would hate to see that lesson learned be dropped because we don't have that centralized person to do that. So I did want to make a comment to that. And to my colleague across the way there, the comment of the City Building Trust Fund versus the Court Street Trust Fund, I had the same question. But I think much of what was said by, sorry, my mind goes in and out every now and then. But the funds were supposed to be, if I'm not mistaken, from the revenue generated from that building. It did, and we didn't say that we necessarily would always put that fund in there. every year, the Board of Aldermen could state that we would put that in. I think we did state that we could put more in if we wanted to. But correct me if I'm wrong, one of the things that happened was the Hunt Building had a devastating issue with their boiler and so on, which goes beyond their trust fund's ability. So the city had to kind of step up. So some of these funds go to help recoup some of the monies that were taken out of that trust fund. Am I correct? Did I understand that properly when you were discussing it?
Yes, the mayor mentioned the $90,000 to $100,000 boiler at the Hunt.
Right.
That comes out of the city buildings fund.
Right. So this is kind of help rebuild that city building fund.
Correct.
And so on. So, I mean, while I agree that I'd love to see that money go into the Court Street Trust Fund, because we talked about building it up and it would take 5-6 years before we could finally get it up there. I do understand that it does go into the it is probably better suited, at least at this time, to go into there. But I would like a little clarification. When we did put that through, we said that the funds would be generated from the revenue earned there. We would determine how much of that would actually go in every year, correct? But I don't think we left an opening that we could just put money in there if we
We're
wanted
getting a
to.
little off track from the escrow.
The other reason I'm asking that is because of the question of putting the city building trust, the money there versus in the Court Street. That's the only reason I'm asking for clarification, but if you prefer me to hold that question up to another day, I don't have a problem.
Yep. Alderman Jettie, did you have? Are you all set, Alderman
Are
Cleary?
you done?
Well, I
Yeah, I
could,
guess so.
Mr. Chairman, I can make a quick thing. It should be based on the revenue generated.
Okay.
It's your choice. It transfers into the expendable trust fund with a Board of Aldermen vote.
Thank you. That answers it.
Alderman Jettie, did you have something?
Yes, thank you. So at the beginning of the presentation, I don't know if it was the mayor or CFO Griffin talked about the source of these of this money, this escrow money, is a result of excess revenues, and then fewer expenses, or the expenses were less than what we had budgeted for. So do you have a breakdown? When you say excess revenues, that means the money that we collected for the last fiscal year was more than we anticipated. And, do you know how much that was?
Mr. Griffin?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, 5.2 million revenues over expenses. I mean, revenues over budgeted revenues.
Okay.
You can't reappropriate revenue, just rule of thumb. You reappropriate appropriations that haven't been spent for a certain other purpose.
And the expenses less than the budgeted amount, how much that was?
I believe it was, before we did all of this and this, about 13.6 million.
Question.
We spent 13.6 million less than we had budgeted?
Correct.
All
Okay.
set, Alderman Jettie?
I have more.
Okay.
If I could. And so I know that Director Cummings is probably waiting for this question. But the 74,000 for outdoor dining, could you explain that to us? What is that for?
Could,
Director Cummings, join us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The reference was for 74,000. I believe that was a prior year escrow. And this year's escrow is 50,000, I believe. Is that?
just to clarify, the sum of the prior year money plus the new recommended funds is the 74,000 amount.
I see the 75. It's the 50.
Did you want to restate your question for him?
He was just asking about this book. We're looking at line 20, I think. Just that one, yeah. You said 50.
Yeah. it's 'cause it's-
Yes, so, I'm sorry, so I just wanted to clarify. So the 74,000, that would be to cover the outdoor dining over the next 2 years.
Yeah, I know it says outdoor dining, but what are we gonna be spending the money on? What are we doing for outdoor dining?
You have to put the barriers down and pick them up.
Okay, so you said that was, that we adopted that for 3 years. I don't remember that we did it for 3 years. I thought it was a year at a time, but, if you knew it was for 3 years, why wasn't it in the budget? Why do we need 74,000 from escrow as opposed to, why wasn't that in the budget?
I'd be happy to do it in next year's budget. Doesn't matter to me, I think, because it was a temporary measure where I knew it was a resolution for just a 3-year period, I thought it would be appropriate not to build it into the operating budget. But if it's the preference of this body for it to be built into the operating budget, I'm happy to do it differently next year.
Okay. I mean, just as an aside, I think we on the committee, at least I on the committee, was expecting, a report. I think you committed to doing a report on how things went this year. Numbers of people, what is the economic impact? Because a lot of people question whether, whether it's money well spent or not. So I think we need to, if we think it's money well spent, I think we need to substantiate that. So, I was waiting for a report before we decided to do it again. But thank you for your answer there.
If I may, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I just want to
Comments?
I want to be really clear. The legislation passed for 3 years. So that if point of your statement, I want to just make sure there's no misunderstanding here. The resolution or the ordinance, I think it technically was, gave a window of a 3-year period for the narrowing of Main Street with the dropping of the barriers. Now, there needs to be a complementary funding source to make that happen, and that's all that this was trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and I'm not, if my comment was interpreted as a criticism, I didn't really
No.
mean it that way. You're right, it was for 3 years, but, the Board of Aldermen can change that
At any particular point.
at any point in time, so we could reverse that, but, you're right, it was, and I understand you're trying to plan
Yeah.
your finances, okay.
Additional questions, Alderman Jennings?
Yeah, no, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Alderman Wilshire.
Thank you. Just to the committee and anyone listening, the departments, we passed the budget that the departments asked for. But there was what do you call it? I'm sorry. A directive from the mayor to come in at 1.3, 1.2, whatever it was for each department. And they did that. But that doesn't mean all these things weren't what they wanted to put in their budget, but they just couldn't. So this is, they held the line, they ran their departments well, they gave money back, and now they're trying to put it towards those projects they felt they needed in the first place. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Any other questions? All right, motion on the floor is to recommend to the full board final passage of R 22063. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No.
Motion passes.
Was that 2 nays?
Yes.
Yeah. New business ordinances.
There are none.
We are not going to take up the tabled in committee items since the person that put that forward is not here. General discussion. Anyone? Alderman Jettie?
Yeah, thank you. You know, I just want to explain that, you know, I voted no because, you know, I've said it before, I have trouble understanding you know, the way that, that we end up doing, you know, the budget. We spent a lot of time, you know, as Alderman Sullivan pointed out, we spent a lot of time going through the budget. You know, there were negotiations between department heads and the mayor, and then with the department heads and the mayor and the budget review committee and then the board of aldermen, and we came up with a budget. And you know, this escrow money is, you know, it's $5.5 million of taxpayer dollars. You know, that, you know, the tax revenue was more than we had budgeted for. You know, it was unanticipated. You know, if we had been, I suppose some people could argue, and maybe, you know, that if we were better at predicting it, you know, the tax rate could have been, you know, reduced by $5.5 million, you know, for that fiscal year. And then we spent $13.6 million, less than what we had budgeted for. You know, now, I think, you know, you know, you talk about budget directors, you know, doing a good job, and they do a good job. I don't mean to take that away from them. But I think, you know, the $13.6 million, you know, was you know, maybe a result of the, you know, the COVID money that we received, you know, the various federal programs and that brought money to the city where we could, you know, end up spending less. And so, you know, this is really, you know, I may be wrong, but my interpretation is that, you know, this is found money. And I think, you know, we could have done a better job of, you know, of returning more of that to the taxpayer, especially in view of you know, what the, you know, the taxes is looking like now. And you know, the items that are, you know, with few exceptions, the items in this list, I mean, they're all worthy programs. They're all things, but, you know, during, you know, the emergency management guy, I remember during the budget thing, I questioned, you know, why don't we need that position? Why are we not funding that position? And the answer was pretty much, well, we don't need it. And now it turns out, well, we do need it. And so we're going back to try to rectify, you know, a mistake that we made by not funding it in the budget. You know, but there, you know, there are a lot of other things that are, you know, worthy programs and worthy expenditures, but they're, you know, they're being judged after the fact. You know, they're not competing with all of the other needs of the city, you know, that are presented to us during the budget review process. You know, I've said that before, and you know, it's been explained to me, well, this is the way we've always done it. And You know, I mean, I can't argue that the city's a well-run city. You know, we get awards all the time. So, you know, I think the people who are running the city know what they're doing, probably a lot more than I do. But, you know, but I still have that, you know, that question that, you know, why are we collecting so much money from the taxpayers and when we you know, we continue to have a surplus? And it seems to me if we did a better job budgeting, you know, or on the other hand, you know, budget department directors ought to come to us and say what they really need, and you know, and not with, you know, not be reluctant to tell us what it really costs, you know, what they really need to run their departments, and not, you know, and say that the budget that they're proposing satisfies them. And then, you know, when we have this surplus, all of a sudden we've got all these projects that come up. So I know other people on this board, and certainly people that have been working for the city, have been doing it a lot longer than I have. They're a lot more experienced. They probably know a lot more about this than I do. But, you know, I felt compelled, you know, that was my opinion, and I felt compelled to express it by my vote.
Okay.
So, thank you.
Just a couple quick things. As chair of budget, I get involved with each one of the departments and division directors. And they take a budget to the mayor, and trust me, the budget that they come into the mayor with is higher than what the mayor presents to us. They come to some kind of a compromise and agreement. And a lot of the division directors work for the mayor. So just read that as you will. The other thing is, none of the departments can end the year in a deficit. If they got to a deficit, we would have to transfer money from one department to another or reallocate additional funds. And we tend not to want to do that. One year the school department did that, and it was believe me, it was a brouhaha, and the Board of Aldermen had to authorize more money for the school department in addition to the budget. The other thing is, as we go through the year, things change. And I think the emergency management position is one that they reevaluated over the year, and that's why they brought it up. So, just, it's not as clear cut. I mean, we could have, you know, if you wanted to bypass the mayor and have the division directors come in and tell us what they want, you would see it's much higher than we get from the mayor. I know, I talked to them all. But we get the mayor's budget, and then we do with it what we do with it. We can add to it, we can take things away from it, or we can pass it as is. So the buck stops with the Board of Aldermen, but that doesn't mean that the departments are getting everything that they originally wanted. I think some of that police equipment might fit into that as an example. So, any other general discussion? Alderman O'Brien.
Yeah, I'd just like to say, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to say that I can understand Alderman Jettie in his comments. I think Alderman Clee would understand sharing the wild 400 that exists up in Concord. But I think Alderman Clee will tell you how we tried to remedy to get some of the state's surplus, which this year is phenomenal, and tried to get 7.5% back into the pension system, which would have meant to the taxpayers in Nashua a savings of 1%. And I could not pry that away from their little spiny little fingers. Yet, we hear, if you believe the truth, from the police chief, which is by Linda's law, any testimony, he can't lie, There is a problem with the pension system and retaining people, both in police and fire, trying to fix it, but there's a complete stone wall up there. And until that stone wall gets depleted, I don't think we can see any remedy, even including in the tax rate, to come filtering down from the state, you know. And it's shameful, because one's got to realize Nashua and Manchester are 35% generators to the state economy, yet they treat us like the unwanted system. 35%. That's nothing to sneeze at. And yet you try to go up and all you hear from some of the reps, oh, here comes Nashua again. It's kind of sad. So I hope that does get remedied in the upcoming elections, and we'll see.
Anyone else, general comments? Alderwoman Kelly.
I just want to echo what Alderman Wilshire and other colleagues were saying, that our departments came in, they ran their departments efficiently, and came back for things that, if you look at these, we all sat here for 3 hours. Nothing was frivolous. Everything is in part of running this community in an efficient and fair manner that allows us to be the city that we are. So thank you to all the department heads and this committee for going through this process.
All right, going to go to public comment. Name and address for the record.
Laura Cajon from 30 Greenwood Drive. I think you're all friggin' delusional. Number one, you have padded the budget. You can just tell by Court Street, it started out at $750,000, went down to $500,000, and actually settled to get a bill done for $150,000. So the difference in those amounts of money, you guys could spend on whatever you want. The problem we have in Nashua is we don't know how to cut our expenses. And that is a problem. Our tax rate wouldn't go up if we didn't go crazy and spend all this money, but you guys just go ahead, spend it, spend it, spend it. And you know what? It's gonna come back to bite everyone in the ass, and I'm gonna laugh. And as far as your pensions go, I hope they go right down the toilet, because there's a lot of people in Nashua that don't have pensions. So if they go down the toilet, I'm gonna sit there like that. Thank you.
Wow.
Anyone else for public comment?
Lori Ortolano, 41 Berkeley Street. Couple things. I think this administration owed this board some better numbers on what averages were. Alderman Jettie asked some good questions. And, you know, it was said by the administration, we don't really look at averages, we look at individual ones. Vision runs all these numbers based on means and medians. It's all averages or midpoints separated by top and bottom. That's how the numbers are run. Now, I look at a little street next to Manchester Street over in the north end that has 11 homes on it, mixed with some 60s, 80s, and a couple conventionals. Their assessments before Vision came in, 266, 233, 182,000, 199,000, 211,000, 383,000, 270,000. That's the range. Now Vision's come in and set the numbers. These 11 properties have gone up or down by this amount. $1,000, $860, $430. One home is down 111, only one dropped. $1,150, $800, $1,800, $1,500, $1,700, $1,300, and $700 for an average for those 11 homes of $1,012. That's a big increase. And you should be able to know that right now because your administration gave you enough information to know that. To have you sit in this meeting and say, I don't know if this is really true, or is what they're saying true, somebody should be able to confirm that. I don't come up here to paint lies, but it's so simple. This is simple math. Regarding the barriers and the $75,000, I'm glad it was asked. I am deeply disturbed that Director Cummings has now taken the position that he didn't get any data this year. They didn't do it. The answer to him and your question on we're going to come back with a report, there is no report. Because he took that ordinance that was approved for 3 years and his statements last year that he'd do the data, he threw it in the trash and didn't do it. Michael Buckley said, I want you to get data. Enough citizens came out and wanted data. Go gather it. They didn't do it. So I gathered data. They don't have any. And the belief that we've approved it for 3 years and therefore it can't change. You can rescind it. And I think it should be revisited. And you got no data. You got Alderman Dowd saying, oh, it's wildly popular. Yes, certain days it was busy. It was very underutilized. People actually don't have
30
money to
seconds.
go out. I don't know if you've noticed that. People don't have $150 to spend on a night out for dinner anymore right now. They just don't have it. So, you know, I think that this board was not given the information it should have been given. And I think you are missing what's going on here. And this spending, your assessing office, the budget in there, what a ridiculous budget. Makes no sense at all. It wasn't frugal. Doesn't even make sense.
Time.
Any other public comment?
Tim Zenit, 62 Underhill Street, Nashua. I'm sorry to keep you here an additional 3 minutes. Nobody likes paying taxes. I hate paying taxes. I hate paying my phone bill. I'm not a rich person either. My wife and I are both mid-salary accountants. We have 950 square feet in Crown Hill, which amounts to about $1 that per square foot that our taxes are going to go up next year. But I look at why I'm here today. I'm in Nashua in 2022 after deciding in 2016 that I didn't want to own my condo in Ward 2 anymore. No offense, Alderman Dowd. We looked at a lot of places. We looked at Hudson, Milford. We looked at entering the rental market so we could live in Rye. And we came back to Nashua because even though my taxes go up, my son goes to a good school with a responsive staff who care about him and care about his development. I live in a neighborhood with good neighbors, good parks, good pools. We had a pool right around the corner from my house. How cool is that? And they're fixing it. We got a baseball stadium, minor league baseball team. I took my son to his first baseball game this summer. All of this I see as a return on my investment in my taxes. They're going up $950 next year. That sucks. But I'll get by because I'm getting money, or I'm getting a return on the money that I'm giving to the city. And I think the list of items that you approved tonight, they're money well spent. It's money back into the community. You know, we heard the term pet projects thrown around quite a bit, and yeah, maybe
1 minute.
maybe one that I'm been on record as being supportive of, but sorry, it's pretty cool. I drove down Main Street the other day. I didn't notice the barriers were up first. That's how much traffic that's how much traffic impact I think it's had this year. So, you know, thanks for the work that you did tonight. Thanks for, you know, and thank you for the dialogue too, for the folks that dissented. It's needed. The questions are needed. That's how we get to a better run city. That's how we get these awards that Alderman Jetty referenced. And I agree. I think we're on the right track, and I'm happy to be here. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Remarks by Alderman?
You just
Karen.
wanted to hear
Alderman
from me.
Karen, rather.
I know, I didn't speak. I'm sorry, I moved to adjourn. Just kidding.
Go.
I wasn't part of the budget process, but I'm well aware of what goes on. As far as all of these escrows, I wasn't too happy with some of them, and I agree with Alderman Juddy and Alderman Sullivan, especially the money for the emergency director. Why wasn't that put in prior to? They must have been talking about it before this, but be that as it may, they put together escrows on the things they felt were important for the city to keep moving. So, do I like my taxes going up? No, but as the last speaker said, you're putting back to your community. So, if you don't like what's going on here, you can always go somewhere else. And I get very offended, and I'm sure Alderman O'Brien does, yes, city employees get a pension, but it's not free. They had to work for it. They had to pay into it. And when I joined, and that was a long time ago, we got involved with it, the city got involved because of the state making a promise of paying 35% to that pension plan. That's how all these communities, especially the big ones, got involved. So the state reneges and the city suffers. That's not on the Board of Aldermen. That's on the people up in Concord. They need to rectify and make things. And Alderman Jettie, I know one of the questions concerning revenue, I don't think that when they put in the budget how much money they're gonna make on registration of vehicles, that it would go up millions of dollars rather than maybe $1 million. So I think we get very surprised at that, and that gets put into our escrow account to be utilized. But if we give too much money to offset the taxes, then people will think that we should be able to do that all the time. And that isn't always possible because things change. You know, we're looking at recessions, inflations, things like that. So I think it's very important. I agree. I would have loved to have put in another $2 million or $3 million. But realistically, the $4 million that we've been doing, I think has really helped. If things go south, I think that the city should do a re-eval again to make the changes that might be necessary. But I think the 15 people here, along with staff, try to do the best they can for their community to provide all the services that people expect as living in this great community of ours. Thank you. My 3 minutes is up.
Do you have something, Alderman Kelly, or?
Did
Everyone
not.
all right?
I was just teasing Alderman Karen.
No one else? Do I have a motion, Alderman Brand?
You sure do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to make a motion that the October 4th, 2022 Special Budget Review Committee be adjourned.
Motion is to adjourn. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We're adjourned at 10:03.